How do you make a difference as a keynote professional speaker? How do you craft a keynote speech that will be remembered long after you have left the room? And how do you build strong relationships with your audiences so that they cannot wait to refer you to their friends and give you a raving testimonial or bring you back to another event? Our next keynote speaker will open his toolbox just for you. He is Berlin-based change agent, author, and international speaker. His clients include the likes of Bayer, BMW, Continental, Lufthansa, Mercedes, Nespresso, P&G, and Pentax. The loving father of 2 daughters who lives with his family in Berlin. If he is not speaking on a stage around the globe, then he loves to play golf or enjoys a fine single malt whiskey. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome with a huge round of applause, because he's got a huge name, Ilja Grzeskowitz.
The first impression as a speaker is so important. And I learned that in 1997 when I participated in a TV show called Family Feud. You remember that? Yeah. And the host was a guy called Werner. And as a typical German, he wasn't very friendly, charming, or even funny. But the audience loved him. And every time Werner went on stage, whether it was early in the morning or late at night, the people always went bananas. And for years, I was wondering how he managed to do that. And then on the first day of our shooting, of our first show, I discovered his secret. He had a warm-upper who came on stage early in the morning, told some jokes, gave some champagne to the audience, and then gave the following instructions. Ladies and gentlemen, in a few minutes, Werner will come on stage, and you will applaud enthusiastically. Then Werner will do this gesture. And you will double your efforts. Then he will do this. And you will applaud even louder and cheer him up. And finally, Werner will do this gesture. And this is the sign for you to go completely crazy, to throw your telephone numbers, hotel room keys, or your underwear on stage. And it always worked. And I thought, if it worked 20 years ago, it will probably work even better with you guys here today. So let's do that first impression thing one more time. Ladies and gentlemen, today's keynote speaker, Ilja Grzeskowitz. Wow. Ooh. Thank you for your honest applause. 7 years ago, my life was completely different. I had just quit my job as a corporate executive, was working as a trainer, coach, and consultant, and was struggling to make a decent living. Back then, I had no idea what a keynote was, or that you can earn money by talking for just 50 minutes. Well, obviously not today. But back then, nobody knew my name. My network contained exactly 0 people, and my brand was basically non-existent. And then I developed this business plan here, this is my business plan really, made 3 deliberate choices, and a crazy roller coaster ride began. Fast forward to today. In 2018, the majority of my company's revenue is generated by me delivering keynote speeches around the world. And I have become kind of like the go-to guy when a company is looking for an expert on the topic of change. And as a change expert, of course, you have to walk your talk. So I thought, why not make a big change right now? And this will not be a canned presentation. And it is something I developed just specifically for you today. And the presentation will work on two different layers. On the first layer, the content, I will show you my craft, and you will learn some practical tools you can immediately use to speak more, speak better, and to raise your fees. On the second layer, the structure, I'm going to deconstruct my keynote while I'm delivering it. And in these behind-the-scenes moments, I will step aside for a moment and show you why I chose the specific material, explain to you the principles behind my stories, and how I use them to generate additional businesses, to get referrals from raving clients on a consistent basis, and how to make a lot of money by doing so. And if you apply these principles to your presentations, you can immediately and significantly grow your speaking business, make a difference every time you give your speech on stages around the world, and make a lot of money by doing so. And so would that be interesting to anyone? Yes. Perfect. So let's jump right into keynote mode. It was a big turning point in my career when I realized that being successful as a speaker is not about luck. It's not about the right circumstances, and it's definitely not about fighting for the biggest piece of a small pie. It's what you say, what you do, and most importantly, how you live your life that makes all the difference in the world. And my goal today is to make a big difference in your world. And to do that, let me introduce to you the 3 choices of change that will determine whether you win or lose in this business. Whether you are just another speaker who struggles to get by, or a sought-after expert, renowned thought leader, and a professional speaker who makes a difference every time you give your speech on stages around the world. And here they are. If you want to go from zero to hero or take your career to the next level, you need to make 3 deliberate choices. You need to choose to focus, you need to choose to take calculated risks, and you need to choose to take action on a daily basis. And let's start with the first choice, to deliberately choosing to focus and to let go of everything that distracts you. Because where your focus goes, your 3 most important resources go as well: your time, your money, and your energy. You get more of what you focus on. And I learned that connection between focus and specific results over 13 years ago from a very special lady. And that lady, she was an actress and the seminar leader for a workshop for department store managers, which I was forced to attend. And if you would have been there, you probably would have described her external appearance as a lot like Cameron Diaz. Remember Cameron Diaz? Yeah. She was, wow. Yeah. She was kind of hot. But after she said her first words, you would have recognized, well, her character is more like Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady, if you know what I mean. And I think my boss knew that because for day 2 of that program, he had a very special idea. Improv theater for leaders. That meant being spontaneous, being creative, always testing your limits. That in turn meant for me, how can I get out of here? Because have you ever been in a situation when you were forced to go to the edge of your own comfort zone? I found myself exactly there when the first assignment started. Margaret Diaz was standing in front of the group, and with a determined look on her face, she said, "Ladies and gentlemen, now I'm going to give you some very uncommon exercises. And no matter what you think of that exercise, I want you to react by powerfully shouting 2 words. Oh, yeah. And then do the exercise. All right? Now, please picture the situation. A nice-looking lady everyone was afraid of, standing in front of you and says, and now everybody jumps on one leg. And 50 more or less experienced leaders, and yeah, please help me with that, are shouting, Exactly. And then they jump on one leg like this. Now, please be honest. How many of you would have done that? Because I didn't, because it was far too embarrassing for me. But it kept getting better, because next she said, and now everybody moves like a monkey. Oh my gosh, they liked that one. And they were even more enthusiastically shouting. Yeah, drumming their fist on their chest while I tried to attract not too much attention somewhere in the back of the room. But I had a gut feeling that the best was yet to come. And I should be right, because she said, and now everybody hugs the person standing next to him. And the whole group is shouting. And to my left, a 6'5" colleague with a full beard, broad shoulders, called Manfred, is extending both his arms and is about to hug me. And I look at Manfred, I look at my colleagues who are already lying in each other's arms. I look at Manfred, I look at my colleagues, I look at Manfred, and we'll get into the final act, because what did I shout? Oh, yeah. You are absolutely wrong. The words, they wouldn't come over my lips. And while the pictures in my head became scarier by the second, suddenly Margaret Diaz was standing in front of me. And she said something that made me think. She said, Ilja, what are you afraid of? Maybe it will be really good. But if you don't try it out, you will never know that. And boom, she was gone. And it was Manfred and me again. Just the two of us. And I had so many doubts in my mind, but even if I had so many doubts, I deliberately said, oh yeah. And then I hugged Manfred, who cuddled himself unexpectedly passionate against me. I mean, he was really passionate. And you know what? It wasn't bad at all. Quite the contrary, because suddenly we got to know each other, then we became good friends, and 3 years later, not what you're thinking, 3 years later, Manfred became my boss. And 2 weeks ago, a lady in the first row said, so you cuddled yourself your way up to the top. And I probably did. But since that day, I look at these two words as a fantastic metaphor on how to deal with change. Because every single day is full of oh yeah moments when we deliberately have to choose our focus. Yeah? Whenever you're facing any kind of an idea, a challenge or a change, you basically have two options. You could say, oh no, it's complicated, it won't work for Glenn Sharkey or Shirley Taylor or Andrew Bryant, but my situation is different, so no. Or you go, oh yeah, how can I make it happen? Let's do it. Big time. It's all about focus. Do you concentrate on what you think is missing, or are you grateful for what you already have? Are you hoping that bureaus or agencies will take care of your success, or do you take responsibility? Are you waiting for the perfect moment to go for it, or are you taking massive action on a daily basis? You always have a choice. And the sum of all these choices lead to the results you achieve in life. And so I recommend saying, thinking, or maybe even singing oh yeah as often as possible, because the oh yeah always adjusts your focus and works like a little buzzer in your mind that gets pushed every time you want to go on negative autopilot again. And because that buzzer works so well, I developed something which sits on my desk and on thousands of desks around the world, and this is my little oh yeah buzzer. And every time my mind wants to go on negative autopilot, I just push it and it goes oh yeah. And I thought, anybody interested in having that buzzer for his, that gentleman over there? Oh yeah? Come on. What is your name? Gary. Would you mind being my assistant for the rest of the talk? Yeah? So there could come a time when I want you to push the buzzer. Yeah? Could we do a little test? Perfect. Give Gary a great round of applause. Thank you. Take a seat. And this is a perfect moment to step aside for the first time and explain to you what I just did and why I did it. For me, a keynote never is a one-time event, and I always have two main goals. First, to provide maximum value for my clients and to generate additional business by doing so. And this story is the main marketing piece in my speeches and has become kind of like my signature story. And it wasn't intentionally developed and it wasn't designed in a secret speaker lab, but instead it more or less found me by accident. Why? Because I listened to my clients. For quite some time I was telling that story mainly to make a point on focus, on courage. And for me, it was just a story, and I didn't even think it was kind of engaging. But my audiences always loved it, and for them, the message of the oh yeah really made a difference. And I got so many feedbacks like, Ilja, since you spoke at our event, we finally say oh yeah to change. Or every team meeting starts with a powerful oh yeah. Or it has been 1 year and still the battle cry of oh yeah roars through our offices. And that's what I call an impact. And it was the moment I thought, maybe you should work on that story. And that's what I did. I developed the characters, made the dialogues more punchy, and especially uncovered the humor that was already there. And again, I did all this by listening to my clients. And this was one of the key learnings in my speaker career. Always observe how your audiences react to your stories, and then use these inputs to improve your speeches every time you give them. And yeah, and what I did, what you just saw, I developed these little buzzers which have become kind of like a success story all by themselves. And you cannot imagine, because it always sounds so easy when I talk about it in hindsight, but you cannot imagine how many haters, naysayers, and know-it-alls tried to convince me what a crappy idea these little buzzers were, because I had to invest a few $1,000s to produce the first batch. And until today, I thought about 25,000 pieces of these little buzzers, and the exact same people keep asking me, Ilja, how did you get this brilliant idea? And again, the answer is, I listened to my clients. Because roughly 2 years ago, a big company who had already booked me twice was asking for a giveaway for their next event where I should deliver the keynote speech. And during our brainstorming telephone call, I was looking at a little Hello Kitty buzzer who said meow that my daughter had forgotten in my office. And in the same moment, I remembered how much that client loved the message of the oh yeah, and I just connected the dots. Buzzer, oh yeah, buzzer, born was the oh yeah buzzer. And that's how every form of creativity works. You take one thing that's already there, and then you add another one that you developed yourself, and the result is something completely and uniquely new. And of course, as you just saw, I always hand out one buzzer to someone in the audience. And yeah, thank you. Works pretty good. And by doing so, I achieve 3 things at once. First, by connecting to one person in the audience, I'm able to build a relationship with the whole audience. Second, by appointing this person as my assistant, from that moment on, I always have a reference point, which then deepens the relationship every time we interact. Right, Gary?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. And third, I use the buzzer as the starting point to generate additional sales and marketing. Because as I told you, I never see a keynote speech as a one-time event, and I always try to generate more business and try to sell more services like workshops or my books, or in this case, branded merchandise. And in 2018, in January 2018 alone, 70% of my clients bought buzzers for every single one of their teams after the event. And oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And it doesn't stop there, because people really use these little gadgets, and very often it sits in their office, in meeting rooms, or even on their front desks. And what happens every time someone pushes that buzzer? They get a good feeling, and they immediately think of, bada bing, me. And this is exactly what I want and what I love about it, because by establishing the oh yeah as my change philosophy, and by selling these buzzers as additional service after the event, I'm basically building after-event relationships by making a lot of money. And who doesn't want that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And what I want you to do now is to say oh yeah to your own creativity and ask yourself the following questions. How can you connect to your audiences to build strong relationships? What additional service or products can you offer to generate after-event business? And most of all, when was the last time you really listened to your clients and adjusted your marketing to their specific needs? And to get the juices going a little bit, let's try out how that oh yeah works with you guys here in Auckland, New Zealand. Are you ready for the second choice of change?
Oh, yeah.
Perfect. So let's get back into keynote mode. And the second choice of change, as a speaker, you have to choose to take calculated risks on a consistent basis. But when was the last time you opened a completely new door? How often are you doing what you're doing only because it's normal, because everybody's doing it, because it's an industry standard? Now, if you want to grow your speaking business, you have to take calculated risks and make that first step into unknown territory. And I did exactly that in the year 2005, 100 meters above the ground. I'm standing next to a guy who holds a cigarette in his left and a can of Dutch beer in his right hand. And he looks like a typical surfer dude, and he smiles pitiful at me. And that doesn't surprise me, because we're standing in a tiny, shaky cabin that's being transported into the sky of Lloret de Mar in Spain by an even more shaky crane. How did I get here? The previous evening at dinner, I shared 1 to 10 bottles of wine with my friends. And after the 8th bottle, someone suggested, why don't we go bungee jumping together? And of course I said, oh yeah, because that was something I always wanted to try out theoretically. But the higher that cabin got practically, the bigger my fear became. And now I'm standing here. Literally, my whole body is shaking, and I've reached the point of no return. And that surfer dude, he takes one last puff on his cigarette, whatever that was, and he looks at me and says, okay, Ilja, are you ready? Do you really want to jump? And there's only one thought going through my mind: come what may, you are never, ever going to jump down that cabin. But what do you think? Which two words were automatically spreading out of my mouth?
Oh,
Exactly. And so the surfer dude opens the cabin door, and I'm standing directly at the edge. Just one step, and it's going down 100 meters. And I know that doesn't sound very high if I'm telling you, and I know for you guys here in New Zealand, I know it's your national sport, and you probably have done your first jump at the age of 3 years. But believe me, for the rest of the world, it's different. And I was never so afraid in my whole life. And so I remembered something which I once read in a Tony Robbins book. Because I read, if you can dream it, you can do it. Just believe in yourself. You are stronger than your fears. But apparently, my legs didn't know who Tony Robbins was and refused to follow my orders. And instead, my mind is going completely crazy. And I have thoughts like, what if the rope tears apart right now? Or what if it's too long? I actually had faked my weight at the measurement beforehand. And I'm so close to quit as I sense a hand on my shoulder. And it was the surfer dude. And he smiles at me, and then he said something I will never forget. He said, listen, Ilja, I know that you're afraid. Everybody is up here. But if you have the courage to jump, the feeling will be just incredible. It's just one step. It doesn't even have to be a big one. It's more important that you take it. Trust me, I will support you. And probably that sentence should have made me suspicious. But do you know these moments in your life when you have complete clarity? This is what I felt, clarity. The voices in my head, they stopped talking, was silent. Because I'd made my decision. Because I would probably have regretted it my whole life if I didn't dare to do it. And what happened next is so hard to describe with words, so I thought I'd bring you a picture. And I don't know if it was the adrenaline, the dopamine, the endorphins, or because I also had taken a little puff on that herbal cigarette from the surfer dude.
Oh, yeah.
But already after 2 seconds, I thought I was flying. I could have done it forever. It was the best feeling I'd ever experienced. And the free fall lasted for maybe 4 or 5 seconds. And then it became even better when the rope catapulted me back up in the air. In that moment, that special moment, I realized something that changed the way I approach my business until today. Because jumping down from that cabin, which I was so afraid of, wasn't scary at all. Quite the contrary, it was probably one of the greatest experiences of my whole life. The only scary thing was the thought of jumping in my mind. And it's that kind of negative imagination that so often prevents us from starting a necessary change. Until we have the courage to overcome these self-made barriers in our heads and make that first step into this unknown territory. Yeah, and when we were back on the ground, all my friends were approaching that surfer dude, and they asked him, come on, even from down here we could see how afraid Ilja was. How did you manage that he jumped anyway? And he said, well, as he entered the cabin, I never would have thought that he was going to jump. But in the end, it was quite easy. He said, oh yeah, he made a decision, and then I pushed him over the edge. And you know, today I can laugh about it. Back then I hated him for doing so. But in between, I learned an important lesson. Because there are times in our life when we really want to make a difference. But for whatever reasons, we're just not able to. And then it's good to have people in our lives who give us a little push in the right directions And especially for us as speakers, it's so important to remind ourselves that nobody wins alone. I love that picture. Yeah, nobody wins alone. And we need people who support us, but at the same time give us critical feedback. We need people who believe in us, who trust us, but at the same time move us here from the safety of the middle to the edge. Here, where the magic happens, in the scary place where we grow. And I learned one thing that day. Being successful as a professional speaker, and this is probably the most important question I'd like to ask you before, who are these surfer dudes in your life? For whom can you be such a surfer dude? Because I learned an important lesson that day, being successful as a professional speaker is exactly like bungee jumping. It always comes down to the same three questions. Do you have the courage to leave your comfort zone and make that first step into the unknown? Do you have the courage to try out new ways, even if you don't know where exactly they will take you? And do you have the courage to trust the surfer dudes in your life? And the key to every sustainable change is to appreciate what used to work and at the same time boldly move forward to the edge of your comfort zone. And then one step further, and another one, and another one. Because it's always here in this scary place where you're confronted with situations you've never been facing before. But only by mastering these new situations, you are able to grow and to get better. And this is what it's exactly all about, because it's about courage. It's about courage because change always means to trade the alleged certainty of the status quo for the uncertainty of the unknown. And there's no guarantee for success. There just isn't. But let me give you one guarantee. There's nothing as frustrating as looking back someday and regretting it that you didn't have the guts to at least give it a try. And John Wayne said it so well. He said, "Courage is being scared to death, but settling up anyway." So are you willing to settle up?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Perfect. Let me step aside again. This is probably the most important material in my arsenal because it helps me to boost my credibility, because I'm able to explain the core of my expertise, which is by definition very rational, or in other words, boring, with a highly emotional story. Furthermore, it allows me to use this one story for many different purposes. And what would you think? Which different topics do I usually cover with this little story? Just shout it out. Change, yeah. Fear, yeah. Leadership, yeah. Motivation, yeah. Yeah. Risks, exactly. It's all in that tiny little story, and depending on the briefing of my clients, I decide where I take a deeper dive. But here's the crazy thing. For years, I was afraid telling that story because I always thought it was too personal and had no business relevance at all. And then one day, I experienced something that changed the way I approach my speeches. Because one day I gave a keynote presentation for a big global brand, and after I was done, I had to go to the restroom. And as I was entering, I saw the CEO and the CFO standing at the sink, deeply engaged in a vivid discussion about my speech, which they apparently loved. But they were not raving about my business examples or about my change models or about my thoughtfully developed diagrams. Instead, they were talking about personal experiences from their lives when they had been courageous. And then the CEO said the sentence that changed everything. Because he said, my heart is still pumping because when Ilja told that bungee story, I was experiencing an emotional roller coaster and I could really feel the change. And I made an important decision for our company. We're finally going to roll out the project we had on hold for such a long time. And in that moment, I realized something very important. The more personal you make your speeches, the more you connect. The more personal you make it, the more you connect. And I'm not doing that by just telling that story, but as the great Lou Heckler always says, by reliving it, by always going first and tapping into the emotion I want my audience, I want you to feel. Isn't it true? When I was telling that story, you were no longer sitting in your chairs, but you were up with me 100 meters above the ground in that cabin, standing directly at the edge. And hopefully you were no longer thinking about me, but about your own life, your own business, and maybe first steps you are afraid to make. And this is exactly what I want. I want you to feel the data. I want you to feel the change. Because logic is important. It lets you think different, but it's always strong emotions that let you take the necessary action. So if you look at your material, your speeches, your business, ask yourself the following questions. What is that personal story you are afraid to tell, but you know would make a big difference for so many people? How can you use one story for many different purposes? And how can you make your audiences feel the data and make them feel the change? The more personal you make your speeches, the more you connect. So let's get back into keynote mode, because it's time for the third choice of change. Choose to take action on a consistent basis. Because success is not about luck, it's not about the right circumstances, it's about being persistent, it's about getting back on your feet every time you fall down. The question is, how bad do you want it? And I will never forget how hard I had to fight for my first paid speaking gig. Way over 1.5 years, I was positioning myself, approached speaking bureaus, called potential clients, without a single result. I think Mike Tyson once said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And I got hit a lot. And you cannot imagine how often I heard the word no during that time. Until one day, I got a call from an HR manager from a big corporation whom I probably already contacted 6 or 7 times. And at first I thought she wanted to complain about that, but she said, Mr. Gresch-ko-witz, it was hard work, but I managed to convince our board. We'd like to hire you for our next company meeting upcoming September. Are you available? And on the outside, I was replying, well, I need to look at my calendar. But on the inside, I was going, woohoo! Oh, wow, that was it. But as I hung up that phone, that feeling of euphoria quickly transformed into extreme nervousness, because that gig was in a small town in northern Germany, was in a huge, large venue, and they announced me in a glossy 2-page article in their company magazine, and the CEO personally picked me up with his car at the train station. And on the day of the event, there were around 800 people in the audience. The expectations were huge, and all the spotlights were on me when the MC of the event said, ladies and gentlemen, now for the highlight of today's event, here is renowned top speaker and experienced expert. Please welcome with a huge round of applause, Ilja Grzeskowitz. And then I came on stage, looked the audience into the eye, remembered my structure, took a deep breath, and then I delivered a speech, which probably wouldn't have been good enough for the parents' meeting in my daughter's kindergarten. The applause was, any golfers around? Golf tournament style. Something like that. The atmosphere was kind of depressed, and everybody was kind of confused. Bottom line, it was a complete disaster. The HR manager who fought so badly for me came to me afterwards and said, "Oh, Ilja, we run this event for 11 years now, but never once was the atmosphere that bad." Our CEO left after the first half. And sometimes it's so crazy because do you know what thought came in my mind for the first time? And how do I get back to the train station now? But after that I realized, wow, that was it. That was the big moment. That was the gig I had desperately been waiting for. The opportunity, the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to prove myself. And I messed it up. Big time. And in that moment, my dream died, and I saw myself at the end of my career as a professional speaker that had not even started yet. And I had so many thoughts like, oh, I'm pretty sure they will put my picture on their wall of shame with a big caption that says, "Worst speaker of all times, and nobody will ever hire you again, and I better get back to my old job as a department store manager." And I was so close to drown in my own self-pity when something happened that eventually saved me. Because a few days later, I was giving a seminar in Switzerland when my assistant came to me during preparation and said, "Ilja, there's someone waiting for you at the door." And 1 minute later, I was looking into the eyes of... Anybody said Manfred? No. That's not true. I was looking into the eyes of a lady who was probably around 75 years old. And I thought, wow, how cool is that? 75 years old and still wants to learn more. But she said, "My father's waiting outside. He is 96 years old and wants to attend your seminar." And in that moment, an elegant man in a wheelchair enters the room. He wears a nice-looking suit, matching tie, and under his arm he holds one of these old brown briefcases. And he stretches out his hand, and with a loud voice he says, "Here I am." And a little bit softer he adds, "I already wanted to attend the last time, but my daughter is always so worried about me and canceled my application. So yesterday I applied again, and this time without telling her." And isn't that amazing? Don't you know people who are 18 years, 20 years old and think after finishing school they are done with learning and they know everything that life has to offer? And here I am, shaking the hand of a gentleman who is nearly 100 years old and still wants to learn more. But at the same time, my level of confidence is somewhere around here. And so I say, well, it's an honor to have you in my seminar, but what on earth can I possibly teach you that you don't already know? And he looks at me with clear eyes and he says, "Stop it, Ilja. There's actually a lot. I read your books and they are great. Actually, I just want to dive deeper into that topic of change. I'm the president of 2 associations. I'm the publisher of a magazine, and currently I'm writing a book. I still have so many dreams. And I know the time I've left may be small, but one thing I know for sure. It's never too late to make a big difference." My friends, words have the power to touch you at the core of your being. And this one sentence did exactly that. It's never too late to make a big difference. That was the sentence that literally turned my life upside down and eventually saved my career. Because if a 96-year-old man approaches life with an attitude of making a difference, when he spreads so much optimism and embraces change, why on earth am I even considering giving up? And in that moment, I promised myself to fight for my dream, to make a big difference too. And in the upcoming weeks and months and years, I worked as hard as never before, obsessively wrote on my books and gave as many presentations as I possibly could. And when I had to deal with a setback, so what? I asked myself, how can I get better? What can I learn from it? How do I need to change? And since then, so many great things have happened. I published 6 more books. Number 7 is on its way. I gave presentations all over the world. And the best part, today, more than 75% of my bookings come through referrals from satisfied clients. Thank you. And this is not because I'm overly talented or because my other marketing channels are weak, but because I have used the 3 choices of change every single day. And let me step aside one last time. This story works on 2 different layers. Of course, there's the actual content, which is about being open, being persistent, and to embrace and to commit to that concept of lifelong learning. But it has an impact on a far deeper level. And it's the material that brings me booking after booking, testimonial after testimonial, referral after referral. Basically, I'm selling from the stage without actually selling. And I'm not doing that by sharing a success story or telling you how great I am, but by sharing one of the lowest moments of my life. Why? Because basically people just don't care about our successes. They just don't. Quite the contrary, if you only talk about how special you are, they may even think, well, of course all this works for him because he's like a combination of Superman and Shirley Taylor. But I'm just a normal sales guy. It will never work for me. No. And of course, nobody in this room would probably do that. But just in case you know someone who knows someone, please tell them to stop bragging and to start being vulnerable instead. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Because deep relationships are always built on your struggles and your failures, because that makes you human, and they probably have experienced something very similar. It's all about connection. And when the connection to my audience is super strong, then I place my call to action. Because when I say, and today more than 75 of my bookings come through personal referrals from satisfied clients, I always add this line. And if my content was valuable to you, it would mean the world to me if you would refer me to a friend, give me a testimonial, or bring me back for another event. And you know what? In 7 out of 10 times, the people follow one and very often even all 3 of these requests. And this is what I really, really love about that. I am helping them solve a problem while skyrocketing my referral rate at the same time. And you can do exactly the same. Just ask yourself the following 3 questions. Are you vulnerable enough so that your audience can connect with you? How can you craft a story that uses your struggles and failures to build a deep relationship? And what is the call to action you want your audience to leave the room with? And if you have the answer to this question, you will always be able to finish your speeches with a bang. Speaking of which, I have reached the end of my presentation, and in a few hours we have reached the end of this great conference. And hasn't it been an outstanding summit so far?
Oh, yeah.
And we learned so many great things that helped every single one in this room to become a better speaker. But there's one thing that is the most important one. Because if you want to go from leader to legacy, there's one thing that tops everything. And this is, you need to tie your stories, your speeches, and your whole business to the life that you're living. You need to walk your talk. In the end of the day, it's your authenticity that makes all the difference in the world. And of course, as speakers, you need to walk your talk because we all know the examples when it's different, don't we? I mean, the time management expert who always shows late for an appointment, or the financial advisor who's completely broke, or the change expert who has given the exact same speech for the last 10 years. Please don't let that happen to you. Be real, be just outstanding, and let go of everything that is not you. And I know sometimes that takes a lot of courage because you will be called different, weird, or crazy. But who cares? I mean, we speakers, we are different. We are weird. We are crazy. I mean, I flew 15,000 miles around the globe just to be with you today. And you are the... and you are the only ones who can relate. Because you are exactly like I am. You are my people. And I couldn't think of a better choice to host a global speakers summit than this great country. And so, thank you, New Zealand, for your warm hospitality. Thank you to Sherry, Mike, Elias, your whole team for your effort and all your hard work you put into that conference. And most importantly, my biggest thank you goes out to you, my global speakers family. It's the best feeling in the whole world to have a home 15,000 miles away from home. And I'm deeply grateful to call so many of you my friends. So let's build a legacy together. Oh yeah, and thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Ilja Grzeskowitz, you're the man. That was just amazing. Thank you for flying all that way to be here with us. Let's give Ilja another round of applause.